So we're going to move on to our first guest joining us, and he's been very patient in studio with us.
He's been
Jeremy
laughing
Butler.
along. You just haven't been able to hear it.
Jeremy Butler is the new CEO of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. Welcome back, Jeremy, now in your new role.
Thank you. It's good to be here. As you said, I was like quietly trying to pay attention to what was going on. I wanted to interject a few times, but I knew that wasn't
You're more than. I mean, this is a
appropriate.
conversation. So you're. What did we say that made you want to interject?
I mean, it was everything. You had the point of, you were saying, is he a politician? Is he a celebrity? And I feel like that's part of current politics. I think too often there's a confluence of those, and people want to be both. And maybe there's goodness to that, in that's how you get your message out to more people, is by being more appealing in a way that traditional politicians haven't been. They're often speaking to people that are traditionally following politics, but maybe if you act in a manner that is a little bit more of a celebrity type, your message is going to reach more people. Now, whether or not that's a message you agree with or not, but I think there can be a positive aspect to that, and that you're getting your message out more and more often.
And what was your take when you saw that cover?
I must admit I was a little bit more with Kerry. I don't think it was politically a good decision, especially not a good way to roll out your campaign. That was good historical background on Vanity Fair. Part of me was thinking it was from Bonfire of the Vanities. That's what I was going to guess. I'm like,
Tom
read
Wolfe.
the book. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I was wrong on that. But yeah, I don't think that's the best way to come across to Middle America. Which I'm from Illinois, so I feel like I can talk about Middle America without it seeming condescending. So yeah, born and raised in Illinois, so I am Middle America. Yeah, but I don't know. It was an interesting choice. But
and so you have a new position.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I forgot that's what we were here to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I heard. It's funny because we were talking and I heard you laughing and I'm like, he has an opinion, so I really don't know what it is. So thank you for that. But so tell us a little bit about your new position and what does it mean?
Sure. So I'm the new CEO of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. It's an organization that was founded in 2004 to support post 9/11 generation of veterans. Our founder came back from the war in Iraq and did not feel that the issues that were important to those who were fighting these new wars were really being talked about in a positive and really nuanced way, especially during the 2004 presidential election. People were very much talking in platitudes about what's best for our military, what's best for our veterans. And he was trying to say, hey, I'm a veteran that was there on the ground. Why don't you listen to me? Why don't you listen to those that I served with about what we feel? And so that's what was the impetus of what we're doing, and that's what we continue to do. We try to be the voice of post 9/11 veterans to make sure that Congress, the administration, politicians around the country are doing what's truly in the best interest of our veterans.
So I know military.com did a profile when you took the reins over, and one thing they mentioned was the Storm the Hill initiative that you're going to be continuing from your predecessor. And one thing they mentioned on was the issue of privatizing or allowing private options for military servicemen. Do you think that's actually going against the grain of what we're seeing, because you have candidates like Kamala Harris and others who are saying, hey, no, we want more government intervention as opposed to private options?
It's one of these somewhat nuanced and a little bit more confusing issues. So there's a lot of talk about privatization of the VA, and we are generally against privatization, with the understanding that there's always going to be private care that is necessary to support veterans. Not everything that the veterans need medically is going to be available and accessible by the VA. But what we want is for the VA to manage all of that care. We want them to be the primary care physician, if you will, to say, hey, okay, we're not able to get you an appointment. We're maybe not the experts on this. We're going to send you to a civilian provider, but we're going to make sure that that provider gets you an appointment quickly, that we are in agreement with the care that they're providing, and that it fits in with the larger umbrella of care that we as the VA are providing to you.
So when you said that there will always be private care, that's not necessarily a guaranteed, as much as I wish that it was a guarantee. Are you going to be trying to protect that?
It depends on what it is. So what I was trying to get at is that it's always been the case that the VA doesn't always provide every bit of medical care to the veteran, and that's totally understandable. They shouldn't. The VA doesn't want to try and be a universal provider of everything that is necessary. Perhaps, if there are things like prosthetics and things like that that come out from, especially, traditional wounds of war, the VA might be the best case to get that care. If you're talking about fertility treatments or something like that, then sometimes the VA doesn't necessarily have that expertise, and it's in the best interest of the service member to be referred to outside of VA care to someone that is an expert in that. So that's what we want to make sure. We want to make sure that the VA, though, is always an integral part in determining who you go see, how is that care being treated, and is it in the best interest of the service member.
So President Trump recently released a budget.
Mm-hmm.
And in that budget, there was an increase in the amount of money that was allocated to support veterans. There are still some veteran groups that were dissatisfied and said that this is not nearly enough and it's not what they had asked for, and that there needs to be even more resources allocated towards veteran care. How do you feel about that?
Well, as I think you guys probably already know, the president's budget is historically never anywhere close to what is actually the budget. Congress is going to decide that. The president's budget is basically just, as president, I'm saying these are my priorities.
Fan fiction.
Exactly. So it's an opening, it's an opening play, if you will. What we want as Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, the organization, other veteran service organizations, we want to have a seat at the table where we're working with Congress to say this is what our veteran members need. This is where dollars should be spent. We just want to be able to help influence that decision. So this is an opening discussion. It's good in that it raises the discussion. That's not something that's often talked about, is the VA budget in the larger sphere of the society. So it's good that we are talking about it, but it's going to be a long road till we get to what the actual budget is. But ultimately, there are better ways, I feel, to spend the money to ensure that veterans are getting the care that they need.
To you, what are the priorities? What should be the priorities?
No, thank you. And so we just released actually our IAVA's policy agenda. If you go to iava.org/policy agenda, you'll see our 12-point plan for what we feel are, or what our members have told us are their priorities for veterans in the country. Number one is support for mental health and stopping the scourge of veteran and military suicide. That's number one, and that's where there can be a lot of changes to adjust funding, to ensure that there's more mental health practitioners, that we have more access to care and quick care for veterans and service members that are possibly having suicidal ideations.
Because we see multiple suicides per day of veterans. And so what's the biggest barrier for them to get the help they need for mental health care?
Well, and you do. And so the current statistic is 20 veterans a day die by suicide.
Wow.
But 14 of those are outside of the VA system. So even when we ensure that the VA is fully funded to do everything that it needs to do, you're still not getting at the root of the problem. So one of the big things, this was in one of the suggestions that the president had, this is in our policy agenda that we support, is making sure that there are grants and funding to outside groups that can reach those 14 of the 20 that aren't being seen by the VA. We have a program at IAVA, our Rapid Response Referral Program, where service members, veterans, family members, anyone that cares about it can call in and get direct resources to those.
And how do you make sure that those are quality control? How do you make sure that they're not siphoning money and just wasting it?
Good question, because it's a two-way door. So we talk to the service providers, we vet them in advance, and then we also work with the service members after we have referred them to them to find out, how did that one work for you? Was it good? Did they make you wait a long time? How was the care that they gave you? And so they rate not only the service that we provided as IAVA, but then they also rate the resources that we referred them to, and all of that gets fed back into our look at what are the best providers out there, and who should we or should we not refer for future veterans to.
So I recently read a book, I don't know if you've heard of it, it's by Sebastian Junger, called Tribe.
Absolutely, I've read it.
So the premise is that, I don't know if you've heard of this, Carrie, but absolutely phenomenal, I recommend it to everybody, but the premise is that the problem with the veterans coming back and dealing with PTSD, that PTSD is a completely manageable mental health problem, right? And the problem is actually our society. It's not them. That we don't have the sense of belonging and community, and that we're actually wired to be part of a tribe, where we're living for the tribe's safety and security, and that this is how human beings are wired to be. And then, but fundamentally, we live in a society that's very inhumane, and that doesn't provide that. So whereas people and soldiers and even people living during times of war, they have that in, it's them and their brothers, right? And they'll give everything. It's ride or die. And then they come back to the society that doesn't share that ethos, and they don't have that anymore. So how do you account for that? How do we kind of bridge that gap in a way?
And that's one of the things that we also focus on is community building, because as you stated, service members, they deploy, even if they haven't deployed, if they're just operating stateside in a peacetime environment, there is that sense of community, cohesiveness, sense of shared purpose and values that really bonds everyone together. You've got people around you that have been through the same things that you have that you can talk to about that. And when you either transition back out to the civilian world, maybe move back home, move to a new town, or as a reservist, you come back from a deployment and go back to your civilian job, all of a sudden, and usually very abruptly, you're segmented away from all that, from anyone that has necessarily gone through similar experiences. And so I think one thing is making sure that veterans can be connected with each other. We try and build that sense of community so that even if you're separated by distance, you're still able to reach out and talk to someone who's gone through what you've been through. But then I think also another big part of it is educating the civilian populace about what veterans experience, what they go through. Veterans are a very rapidly diminishing segment of the population. We're becoming a smaller and smaller percentage of the population, and so there's fewer and fewer of us around, and that's the trend that's going to continue. And so we can't allow the civilian-military divide to continue. We need to make sure that civilians understand what service members have gone through, what deployment's like, what they're returning to, and so I think that's a big part of it, is the education side of things.
Well, Jeremy, we appreciate you always coming on Bold TV and IAVA, coming on and educating us. So congratulations on your role, and come back.
Thank you, I will, and
Educate us.
congratulations to the new studio. I like this.
Thank you.
I didn't get a sneak peek over to look at how this was set up. I didn't.
Yeah.
Wave.
No.
I know,
Hi,
now I
Mom.
can wave. I kept meaning to, wasn't sure if I was looking
Yeah.
proper, my tie was
Nope,
straight.
you're good.
Great.
Okay, good,
Jeremy's
thank
our
you.
first guest and our first live stream in the
Yay.
studio.
Very
so-
exciting.
It is exciting.
Yes.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you
Thanks,
for being
Jeremy.
with us.
Pleasure.
Appreciate it.